have an interaction with them enough to worry about where we even stood when it came to critical infrastructure. And the third thing was private sector was not organized to share information about the protection of critical infrastructure. So when he signed the executive order, as some people are aware, the presidential or executive orders and these sort of things can direct the U.S. government to do things, but recommend things to private sector. So in May of 1998, during a speech at the U.S. Naval Academy, he talked about those three things. The first thing was encouraging private industry share information in what they call ISACs, Information Sharing Analysis Centers. The reason that was so important, because at least the vast majority of what we depended on had the ability to share information. And bear in mind at this time, for those that sort of follow the tech industry, my old boss, Bill Gates, Scott McNealy from Sun Microsystems, and Larry Ellison from Oracle were not exactly the best of friends at that time. But yet Mary Ann Davidson, the Chief Security Officer for Oracle, Whit Diffie from Sun Microsystems, and I worked very closely to help create these things, creating the IT ISAC. There was the financial services. And this has paid tremendous dividends. But it only gave us part of what we needed. So zoom ahead to post 9/11. President Bush appointed Richard Clark as the chair of the President's Critical Infrastructure Protection Board. I was the vice chair until Dick's retirement, which he really should not have retired, but he did. But we put out a national strategy to secure cyberspace. And I encourage you, if you have an opportunity, it is still very much available on the White House and the Homeland Security websites. But it said the same thing. Some of the key components: reducing vulnerabilities, both in the government and out of the government. Looking for cooperation about international things. Looking for the education. And this morning there was the comment about the education, about 300,000 people short just in the United States, and multiply that around the world. That national strategy was the tipping point in establishing the things that we needed to do as a nation. And I'm very pleased in a number of cases, we have worked with other nations to develop strategies very similar, but fit their culture, that fit their nation. And one of the things in there were the issues about vulnerabilities and the exploitation of vulnerability in nation states, criminal gangs, activists, how we can protect against that. Then zooming ahead to President Obama, he asked us to put out 3 national strategies. One of them, the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, looking to develop what are the skills necessary. Because back in the old day, when we did computer security, that was later named information security, later named information assurance, and now called cybersecurity, we knew we would not have enough people to fill the positions, but we had to figure out what the positions were. And it's interesting, from my private industry and my government, when you talk to someone about what is a cybersecurity expert, they say people that understand security. But there's different things. There's different technologies, mobile devices, Internet of Things, televisions being the center of your existence, let alone the network things and the identity management. And all these things fit into it, but they're all part of a big cybersecurity. So we had to develop what are the discrete skills that are necessary as a nation for the U.S. government, but just as importantly, because the vast majority of the people that protect us are indeed the private industry, and give them a vehicle by which they can have careers. I was speaking to someone earlier, when Ambassador Dan Shapiro and I worked together at the White House before he took over as the great ambassador. And he talked about some of the children in his family and others around, that this is a good path to go, if indeed the opportunity presents itself. So that was one. The second one was the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, basically identity management. When we look at the vast majority of the intrusions that take place, they all circle around using user ID and password. And I would imagine many of the people in this room and the ones that I know, you don't have one or two passwords and user IDs. You don't have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. I have 57 different accounts, different airlines, different hotels, different accounts, different, universities that I'm a part of. We need to move away from that, and that was the idea when the president signed this strategy, to say we need to create an identity management ecosystem that is not owned and operated by the private sector, by the U.S. government. It's owned by the private sector. As a matter of fact, the government was looking to be a customer of that. But when you look at all the bad things that have happened, including many of the things within the U.S. recently, they all boil down to clicking an email that gives someone access to a system to elevate, which is the second part of the digital identity. Because if you're receiving emails from a digital signed person or individual, you have a higher level of trust. You can filter out the bad things, the phishing emails, the pieces of malware. So it was very important for us to develop this national strategy. The third one, and probably the most important, that affects all of us today, is the national strategy for international cyberspace. You notice there's nowhere in that word that says security, because cybersecurity is more than, it's just a piece of cyberspace. We need it. We need defense. We need the military. We need the law enforcement. We need the security firms within the companies. We definitely need the universities to train our next generation. But it's much more than that. When I served for President Obama, I wore 2 hats. I was looking at the national security aspect of it, but also the national security side of it as well. And it was interesting because we would go in the sit room and I would tell people, declare immediately that I'm the only one in this room who can be legally schizophrenic in what I say. On the security side, we want to lock it down. We want to protect it. We want to make sure people aren't getting into it, and if they do get in it, they're found immediately. But on the other side, we want an open society, an open internet. We had to find that balance. So Israel, Singapore, Japan, Germany, a lot of the countries that I work in are absolutely looking at the same thing. Where is that balance? But what we do know, that the international cooperation is key. And my last comments about the international cooperation. I've seen it in many areas. The comments were made earlier today about the cooperation is so vitally important. Since 1998, and even earlier than that, we've talked about it. We need to execute. We need to start trusting in our friends and our colleagues, and not having information that's only available to the United States or to Israel or to Germany or something. Because even though we have national interest in this, the internet is much bigger than that. If we want to have it protected against countries like we've seen recently, North Korea, Iran, that are looking to do things either in a retaliation or more or less to get a head up on us, we need to protect against those. But we don't destroy the internet and protect it against others. Our privacy protection is critical. It's not just something consumers need to worry about from businesses. When you look at a situation where you have 4 million victims, those are things that could have been prevented by doing the things that we need to do, by sharing the information, by looking at the technology beyond our borders. Because when I look at the technology here in Israel, or Singapore, or India, or places like this, it should not be discounted. Because even though the big companies, the multi-companies around the world work at this very hard, there's also a lot of companies then can provide that same technology. But don't get labeled with, oh, this is a foreign country and it's a foreign software, therefore we can't trust it. We have to learn that trust. If the governments can't do it, then we in private sector have to take the lead and make a difference in what we do. Because all of you in this world, in this room, and any place we go, you're a citizen of the internet. We may have our national citizenship, but the internet is what makes us work in everyday life. So while we have problems, and we will continue to have problems until we develop the technologies, we develop the business processes, and we develop the government relations that are willing to stand up and say, listen, we will cooperate with each other to stop the bad guys, but also improve the life and the interoperability through the internet. So the last point, if you have an opportunity, and Ambassador Shapiro brought this up this morning, the National Strategy for International Cyberspace is an invitation. It's an invitation for everyone in this room to do their part to secure our part of their part of cyberspace, and that indeed makes us all more secure. So I thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and talk about these things and encourage you to do your part to secure cyberspace. Thank you very much.